Hello, I'm Nikki Starr, welcome back to my channel, and today we're just doing a quick little announcement video for what am I doing for NaNoWriMo, what even is NaNoWriMo, why must I continue to do this to myself. If you've not heard of it before, NaNoWriMo is National Novel Writing Month. The idea is that within November you attempt to write 50,000 words over the course of the 30 days. The original concept is that you would write a completely fresh novel, something you've never written before, and it's in an attempt to fast draft that first draft out of you, no matter what the standard of that draft is. So the idea is just to keep writing, to allow yourself to write in some ways poorly because of the speed you're going at, and then to come back later to allow yourself to have that first draft, to tell yourself the story. If the concept of that interests you and you've not seen it before, I will link down below the NaNoWriMo website where they have more information about it, and you can also sign up. You don't have to spend any money to do this. It's completely a challenge that is just you challenging yourself to do it. So you'll sign up to the website and you can track your word count. You can have, there's a graph that you can follow, and then there are also other people on the website. So I'll also leave my buddy name down below if anyone wants to sort of connect up on the website. I have been doing this since I was, no, we're not saying that. This will be my 12th November NaNoWriMo. I would have done this for 12 years if I manage it this year. And I'm going to be honest with you, the majority of those is not based on any kind of skill or any kind of really good system I have in place. Most of that is pure stubbornness, that once I set this challenge it's going to happen or I'm going to be very mad. So not the healthiest way of looking at it. So like I said, the traditional way of doing NaNoWriMo is it to be your first draft of something you haven't touched before. I am technically rebelling, which is where you do something slightly outside of that. So for some rebels, they might be editing a book. For other people, they might be doing a screenplay instead. There's all kinds of other things that you can make it work for. For a lot of people, November is just a month that they try and dedicate some time to their craft. And often if you do writing outside of the year, quite often November isn't just going to magically be exactly what you need it to be. So sometimes, like me, hopefully I'll be in the middle of a draft by the time we get there. And if you haven't seen my last video, this is the post-it note of chapters, because earlier this month I started drafting Space Pirates Book 1 on its second draft. We're doing a fresh rewrite, so I am not going to want to put that aside to do something new in November. I feel like that will break my momentum. So the idea is that in October I'm going to try and write 30k. We're about halfway through the month and I'm not necessarily convinced of that, but we will try and aim for 30k, and then next month we will try and do NaNoWriMo and hit the 50k, but I will be mid-book, so it won't be the traditional NaNoWriMo start, but hopefully it will get me quite close to the end of the book. So again, if you've not been on my channel for a little while, my Space Pirate series is what I've been working on for the last couple of years. And last year I drafted my way through all of the books bar one. I didn't want to fast draft the last one in case I felt like I'd completed the series, because that would have been a problem. But I fast drafted through them all, and I'm now in a completely fresh rewrite of them because they were very fast drafted. Very fast. And I understand that's somewhat of a contradiction, because I'm saying that I'm going to go into NaNoWriMo and fast draft 50k. With my experience of NaNoWriMo, I do think I might be able to potentially slow down a touch and still manage. I thought while I was here doing this video, because I have managed it 11 years on the trot, that I would give at least a couple of ideas or tips or things to do, particularly as we're still in October. And what I would say is the months that I've done NaNoWriMo and it's been easiest are the ones where I've prepared in advance. If you are a pantser or a discovery writer, any of the kind of times where you don't do full outlines, you don't like to plan ahead, you just kind of want to jump in and go for it, what I would recommend, because I have done that before, is that if you have got literally like a 1 or 2 sentence line concept, add a little bit to it in October. Flesh some bits out, just because the excitement over the concept, in my experience, will last you maybe the first week, maybe even into the second week. But with how solidly you are focusing on this book over a whole month, and there isn't time to kind of percolate the ideas in between, because most days you're having to write a certain number of words to hit the goal. Quite quickly, you are going to burn through those 1 to 2 sentences. And in some cases, you might go off in a whole different direction and it might turn out wonderful. But in other cases, you might find yourself severely stuck. So I'm not saying make yourself a massive binder with all of the things planned out and all the characters. What I would possibly tell you, if you've got the capacity in October, is maybe to try and have I personally like to come up with like names of some of my characters, because if I have to do that during Nano, I'm just going to keep typing random letters until no one can pronounce anything. But what I'd recommend is having your like main character, maybe a couple of the supporting characters, and specifically for your main character, having a couple of lines of the plot, obviously, but also potentially their motivations in the plot, or a couple of sentences about them, or if you are so inclined, because NaNoWriMo is a fast draft, get it out of you, you could put down a quirk that they have that's really kind of stereotypical, but you can try and see if you can add it in. And if from the concept you are noticing that you could potentially have a trope or two, I would write that down. Have an idea of where you could go with it, or at least where you could find inspiration in other stories that are similar. So for example, my Space Pirates is quite found family. So in one of the previous NaNoWriMos, when I was writing it years ago, I made a point to have a couple of found family like films or books around, so that when I got to a point where I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, I can't do it anymore, I'd have an inspiration well that I could go to. While you don't necessarily need to meticulously outline everything, having something before you jump in, which I think is probably more my Plantser idea coming out, which is where you do a little bit of planning and then you pants your way through most of it. Whereas this book, this is planned out way more than I was expecting it to be. But having a little bit of something, if you are not someone who likes planning, really stops you from getting to beginning of week 3 and going, I have nothing. I have tapped out those 2 sentences dramatically, because you'd be hoping that like subplots would turn up and character interactions would start happening, and they probably do, but you may run dry. I have run dry a few times and had to essentially add a twist into a book or spin it off in a different way to just interest me enough to carry on, which is not necessarily what you want. So more of a kind of universal tip, doesn't really matter how you write your books. If you are going to commit to this, it is a lot of time and it's a lot of energy. So I would suggest, particularly if you've got people you live with or people you're close to, people you hang out with a lot. I know that not everyone necessarily wants to share with everyone in their life what they're doing, what they're writing, but I would suggest, if you feel comfortable telling people what you're doing so that they have an expectation before we get to November, that you are going to be less available, that you're going to spend more time on the writing, or if you live with people, got a spouse that you live with, and you want them to pick up a little bit more of kind of the household stuff so you can do more writing, that kind of conversation, definitely have one of those. And with people that you're like, you would usually hang out with more often, you can tell them that I'm going to be doing this challenge, it matters, you know, it means something to me, or I really want to see if I can do this. You probably won't see as much of me. And lastly, very, very small tip, if you celebrate Christmas, don't let the whole of November go without thinking about it. Because the amount of times I've got to the end of November and thought, oh, NaNoWriMo is done, and then just Christmas panic. So that's kind of my overall bits and pieces of tips, what NaNoWriMo is, and what I will be attempting with these sticky notes. And if you haven't seen my last kind of vlog, where I put them all up, they are definitely peeling off the wall. They're not going to stay there forever. This time around, I'm doing a very visual representation of how far I've got, which is not very far. That being said, thank you so much for watching. I've been Nikki Starr, and I will see you in the next one.
I've been dreaming on in my head like I've seen it. A life worth living is a life with meaning. I'll do what I love till my heart stops beating. I'm feeding this demon. Got a taste, can't erase.